Episode 12, everyone. Welcome back to Two Nobodies. This is our first video episode. So, I trimmed my ear hairs and trimmed my nose hairs and
I did
cleaned up
no grooming at all.
Yeah, well, I guess you don't know what Kyle looks like before. I think
Just
nothing.
bad. Just always bad. Just like
Okay.
this. Disheveled. That's a good word. Disheveled.
So we're really excited to sort of bring this podcast to video. I don't know if we're going to do it every episode. I think for sure with the guests, Kyle and I have committed that we will do that. But as far as when it's just Kyle and I, we'll kind of see how that goes. But the reason why we're doing video also is today is, this is our second guest, and it's Tim Grant, and we're going to bring him in shortly. But before I do that, Kyle, you already jumped in. How was your week? How have things been going?
Yeah, week was good. A little hectic. Just feels super busy these days. I don't really know. So it was a good week, but nothing spectacular, which is such a boring answer. And it's my answer every week, it feels like, which is too bad. How about you?
Well, you're on the clock right now. You've got a week before, at least technically, and then we'll see what happens. But
yeah, that's right. The countdown is on. So preparations and all that stuff. So that's taking up most of our time, I suppose. Yeah.
Car seats in.
Car seats in. Both are in now, which we drive a family sedan. And I understand now why people get minivans, because room is at a premium. And I don't know how.
But I've been in your car though. Your car's pretty comfy. You got some pretty comfy seats.
It's a roomy family sedan. Voluptuous maybe. It's like a voluptuous family sedan. So there's lots of room as far as sedans go. But when you compare it to like a van, or lately there's been like a real move to get sort of larger SUVs back on the road. So like Subaru and Kia and all these manufacturers are now producing again big SUVs, which is sort of weird. But so there's a lot of options for more room, and our car does not have it.
Well, I don't know if you know this, in Alberta, 80% of new sales are in SUVs and trucks. And that trend holds consistently across Canada, not maybe as high as 80%, but the majority of new vehicle sales are SUV and trucks. I'm pretty sure the United States is very similar.
Is that true with historical? I feel like, well, in Alberta anyways, people are always buying trucks.
Well, perhaps maybe in Alberta that might be true, but it's definitely shifted away from cars. So, are you thinking about buying an SUV or?
We're gonna see how it goes with this car. I hate car shopping. I don't know if anybody's ever gone car shopping before. It's the worst. It's that stupid little game. If you go into a dealership, which I bought my car. Not new, it was pre-owned, but from a dealership. Mm-hmm. And so you play that stupid little game where you go in and the salesman's like, "Hey, here's a car," and how much is it? And he's like, "Well, that depends." And then you have a back and forth. Yeah. And finally he gets to a price or something, and then he has to go talk to his manager to get approval on it. It's all bullshit. And they just how come it's not here is the thing, here's what the thing costs, pay the money to get the thing.
Well, you can if you have the money to buy a Tesla, you can do it that way. You can buy that online. But
I don't have money to buy a Tesla.
No, fair enough.
How much
there are more dealerships now, or more companies that are thinking about doing the online model, because for Tesla, it doesn't matter who you know, as far as so they say anyways. There's no negotiation. What it is. What does it cost to buy a Tesla? Well, Tesla Model 3 in Canada can start at.
Is that the car?
Yeah, so the Model 3 is the smaller car, and then if you wanted something bigger, that would be the Model X or the Model S. So
okay.
Those are the really expensive ones. So the cheapest car is the Model 3 and the Model Y. The Model Y is more of a compact kind of SUV. That probably starts at about 55 Canadian.
That's less than I thought.
Yeah, but it runs you up when you start adding things. So I would say a decent, you're probably going to be paying about 65 to 70.
But if you buy go look at a brand new Toyota. What's a Toyota van? Toyota
Sienna.
There you go. So go look at a brand new Sienna. They're $50,000 probably. Cars are just expensive.
Yeah, I think EVs the prices are definitely coming down. Still not there. But if you wanted the higher end Model S, Model X, I actually I priced this out every now and then because it's definitely my dream car. It could run you up to about 180,000 for the fully loaded Model S, Model X, and these things are just
What about the truck?
Joe Rogan talks about the Tesla, saying he's like, it makes all the other cars just look stupid. Like,
so does he have one?
I think so. Yeah.
That's 2 episodes in a row that we've talked about Joe Rogan now. Or no, maybe not. 2 out of 3 we've mentioned Joe Rogan.
Oh, I don't remember.
So where's the truck, and how much is that weird looking truck?
The Cybertruck's supposed to come out, I think, later this year. It's being produced in Austin, Texas. Yeah, how much is that one? I think it's around 70, 75.
I mean, if you get like a fully loaded, like a Ford F-350, you're not getting it for less than that, probably.
Oh, I think there's going to be no reason for people in about 3-4 years for them not to buy an EV, because not only will there be a price comparison, but just from a performance standpoint, they're going to be much better than a gasoline vehicle. So, and then people have range anxiety and stuff like that, but that's definitely improving.
That range will have to increase over time.
Oh,
right?
Battery density is increasing, and they're not only are they bringing down the cost of batteries, but they're trying to focus on density so you improve range. But at the end of the day, most people are driving, to and from work, and you can easily meet that on any electric vehicle right now. So
yeah, probably like 99% of the trips you take, that car is just fine.
Absolutely.
But it's that 1% that people are worried about.
Yeah, everyone just worry about, for sure.
Which I guess makes sense, because you don't have to like rent a vehicle when you spent $70,000 or $180,000.
No, for sure.
On a car, you don't want to have to go rent a car to go further than 5 hours.
If you've got a Tesla, then you're pretty much safe. Like if you're talking about from where we live in Edmonton, if you wanted to go down to Southern California, you're good, because there's a Tesla roadway essentially that you can connect to.
Nice.
But I mean, there's other parts of Canada or other remote parts of the United States where charging stations are, not as common. So
that's a really long way of saying my week was okay.
Yeah.
And your week's okay. And we should probably get to Tim.
Totally.
20-minute introduction.
I know. All right, guys. Yeah, so we have Tim Grant. He's waiting. He's going to be joining us really soon. We're really excited to have him on the show. You'll hear from his experiences, just incredible amounts of leadership experiences, really quality individual, and we're just looking forward to talk to him. So hope you enjoy the episode. Hey everyone, so we've got our second guest of our podcast today. His name is Tim Grant. And I'm going to give, Tim, before we start our conversation, I got to give the audience a little bit of a background on yours. I'm not going to read through your very lengthy and prestigious bio, but I'm going to give a few snippets here. Tim commanded the Canadian troops in Bosnia and Afghanistan. He received the Meritorious Service Cross by the Governor General for his leadership in Afghanistan. He was awarded the Officer in the Order of Military Merit, which recognizes outstanding and exceptional service members of the Canadian Forces. He retired as a Major General in the Canadian Forces in 2008, which I believe is the third highest rank. I don't know, Tim, why you didn't make it to General, but that's another conversation perhaps. And then, he just couldn't stop serving, so he joined the Alberta Public Service as an Assistant Deputy Minister, first to Energy, where he was responsible for electricity, alternative energy, carbon capture storage, and then became a deputy minister in 2011, led multiple departments, and then appointed as an executive in residence at the Alberta School of Business, and then returned back to the public service, where he's currently the Public Service Commissioner. So, Kyle, I feel like we have an underachiever on our hands.
What an impressive list, Tim. Wow, well done.
I'm going to say I am an underachiever, because the reason I actually left the military at that illustrious rank was I couldn't speak French well enough.
That's what always does it, eh?
Yeah. So of all the things that I could do, speaking French was not one of them.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like you go from the military and then to the public service and then leave and then come back. Like, where does this feeling of needing to serve come from? Like, how did that start with you, and why do you feel like you have to continue? At some point, you must be getting tired of just serving others.
It's a great question, and I had a friend who's passed away now, Willie Grieve, who was the chair of the Utilities Commission here in Alberta for a number of years. He had a theory that you can divide people into two groups. One is you're involved in commerce, the trading, stock market, you're making money, and the other group is a guardian group, and it's based on a U.S. Sociologist thesis, and for the life of me I can't remember her name, but essentially I put myself in that guardian category. So military, police, firemen, those kind of people who are looking out to protect others and serve others on a go-forward basis. So not that one is, commerce is bad, guardian's bad, whatever is, either is good. It is what it is. And I just think I fall into that service. I think I learned a lot of it from my parents, from my dad. He had served in the military. And so it just seemed easy. I would say, Rupesh, though, that when I left the military, I was offered positions in the private sector.
Okay.
And could have made more money without question. But I will tell you, I was uncomfortable because it was a weird world. I wasn't used to the private sector. I really was used to public service, and so I kind of say I took the coward's way out. I took the thing that I knew best, which was public service, and the other part is when I got out of the military, I was working in Ottawa. My family was all here in Edmonton, and I decided I needed to come back here, and the provincial government provided me a job, offered me a job here in Edmonton, so everything just kind of lined up nicely. But I think it's been just a lifelong, the right thing to do in my mind is to help others where you can make a difference. So
you said coming from your parents, your dad was in the military, so that kind of was a continuation of there. I've read up and learned a lot about these amazing leaders and these great people, and they say that there's something that you can kind of trace back to your childhood or your early days that sort of says, this is what you should be doing, or this is something that you're passionate about. Was it just really like that, the fact that your dad was sort of in the military and kind of maybe inspired you or kind of taught you about that? Or was there something that you felt deep within inside you that you felt like the armed forces and maybe the public service kind of taps into?
I wish it was that deep.
Okay.
There's 7 kids in my family, 3 boys and 4 girls. My oldest brother, and he would not be surprised if I said this on a podcast. It's a little bit left wing, right? He's the guy who had long hair and a ponytail his whole life, and bright guy, lots of postgraduate degrees and that kind of stuff. But I'm not sure at a young age that I knew I was going into military, or it was something that it was specifically, my dad said you should do this. I actually had other plans coming out of university. I was actually, oldest brother is actually a geologist, and he was prospecting for gold in Northern Ontario, and I actually wanted to go and join him. So that's why I focused my degree on in university, but it just didn't work out for me. And the only place I could get a job on short notice was in the Army. And I kind of joined thinking that I would, do this until I got a real job. Which didn't happen until 31 years later at the end of the day. But I think it's something that slowly grows upon you. You sort of begin to feel comfortable in an area or a way of life. And for me, it was, I was always used to, as I say, a big family, 7 kids in 7 years. For any fathers who think of this, my mom had 5 kids in 30 months. So it was my oldest brother and then 2 sets of twin girls, and then me and my youngest brother. But it was you're living in a small group, and you learn how to get along, and you learn group dynamics. And back then you had to play together, fight together, whatever it was. But at the end of the day, it really I think it was just a natural progression for me that the military didn't scare me. I'd seen my dad in it. I'd seen what it had done for him. And there probably was some fate, some karma, some, whatever it was that kind of drew me in that direction. And then it just solidified over time once I was wearing a uniform.
Was your father in a leadership role in the military?
Yeah, so he had a unique career. He had served in the Second World War as an officer, and he was one of the leading. I'm not sure how to describe it. The group that invented radar for the Battle of Britain. So
Mhm.
he served in Britain throughout the war, and he was involved in setting up the radar line so that they could see German bombers and fighters coming across the canal. Um, and as an officer, he had obviously a leadership role. But when he came back to Canada, there was a whole bunch of things happened, and the military was too big. So he ended up um, giving up his commission as an officer and started to work as a sergeant, working on heavy radar systems across northern Canada. Sort of at that time, looking to, detect Russian bombers, during the Cold War
Mm.
days. But he rose to be a chief warrant officer, the highest rank for soldiers or airmen at that time. So yeah, he always did have a leadership role, and even when he got out of the military, he actually became the commanding officer of a cadet corps, an air cadet squadron in Sudbury, Ontario, and turned all of his leadership skills and traits into taking a very small and probably not very successful organization and quadrupling its size and building a band and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, throughout his life, regardless of what his rank was or his position was, he always did sort of display those leadership skills that we all kind of strive for, I would say.
Tim,
Really
we've
interesting.
no, go
Sorry,
ahead, go ahead,
Rupesh.
Kyle. No, go.
I just read a book about Winston Churchill's first year in office, which happened to be the first year that I think Germans started bombing London on a nightly basis, and all the efforts that went into detecting where the planes were coming from using radar, but also scrambling their system so that they would think that they were dropping a bomb on a town or a plant or something, but they would actually be dropping it in the middle of a field, or they would go out and light incendiary fires in the middle of the field so that the bombers would think that it's a marker fire and they would hit that field as opposed to the towns. And just incredibly interesting time for your father to kind of be involved in that work. I mean, as far as points in history go, that's a pretty big one.
Well, it is, and it's funny. We knew about this. He had talked a little bit about kind of what he had done and how he had done it. But you kind of think, well, yeah, it's what kind of role do you have? But years later, we were going through after he died, we are going through some of his papers, and there's a scroll that there is signed by Winston Churchill, sort of saying to all of the people who were involved in the radar war, kind of as the unsung heroes of the Battle of Britain. So it's kind of neat. It kind of brings it home.
Yeah.
I was just gonna come back to your dad, Tim, a little bit. Like Kyle and I have talked about sort of the role our dads have played in our lives, and just that sense that both of our dads have been present in our lives very much so. And I always have wondered about military families and fathers and sort of the presence that they play on their kids. Like, what would you say that was like for you growing up with your dad? Like, was he a present person, and has that affected you at all? Or
I would say there were times for sure he was present, but there's a couple of occasions where he actually had to post things away from us. So he would go to an isolated location in northern Ontario, northern Canada, where families weren't allowed to go. So we would stay in the south. He would be gone for 2 years or 3 years, and so we kind of had to manage on our own. But when he was there, he was very much there. I mean, the things I remember as a kid is, going fishing with him. I mean, he was a kind of an avid outdoorsman, loved to fish, and to be able to go out and spend some of that quality time with your dad and one on one with him. Yeah, those certainly made up for any of the times that he was not there.
mm,
I think in a similar vein though, I've been away from my family a fair amount when I was the last years I was in the military. So we moved from Calgary to Edmonton in 2000 or 1996, And sort of the 12 years from then till 2008, when I got out of the military, I was actually gone for 7 years.
Wow.
Not 7 years straight, but a year here, whether it was working in Ottawa or deployments overseas. And I bugged my daughter, who's now in her mid-30s. She's your age, right, guys? And she says, "You were never." Whenever she gets mad, "You were never here." Okay, great. When are we going to get over that piece?
Right.
But it is one of those things that if you're not there, it weighs on you. What are you doing? Luckily, I had a really strong wife who managed the kids. But when you come back, you just want to make sure that you do play that role and you're as involved as you possibly can be. Yeah.
So what would that look like? Because I would imagine that'd be really difficult for you, right? Like you go on these, you served overseas, you go on these trips, and then you kind of come back and have to sort of reinsert yourself. Like, do you remember what those feelings were like, or what you kind of told yourself about, like, okay, how do I sort of reintegrate with my daughter? And
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I used to tell this story to soldiers when we were deployed and soldiers would be coming back home. I used to always tell them the same story, that the first time I was away, I came back home, and at that point we had a big golden retriever, and which was sleeping on my side of the bed, and sort of went up to get in bed, and the dog growled at me, right, and because I wanted to get in. And golden retrievers don't actually growl, but I'm thinking, like, what is with this? So the dog and I had a long chat about who was actually in charge. But it really drove home the fact that whenever I was away, you had to actually work yourself back up the food chain, right? First of all, it was tell the dog it's my bed, not her bed. But after that, it's very much it was a process of, the kids, my wife had a routine, they had a structure in their life, and me coming back, whether it was for 4 weeks of R&R, or it was coming back home to do a job full time, you had to. I found anyway, you had to be fairly nimble and thoughtful about how you were reintegrating yourself back into that home life, because, as I said, if you're away that amount, they have routine, they have rules.
Life doesn't stop, right?
Does not, yeah. And you can't just pop yourself in and out and
Sure.
say, we'll do it my way when I get home, because that just doesn't work.
Yeah. And I'm assuming too, at the same time, you're balancing just, you're leaving from a situation. It's not like you can just turn off what you just came from, perhaps,
Right.
Especially if it was a mission that, had, enormous consequences or something like that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Rupesh. It's when you come back for 2 weeks of R&R, your mind is still on the soldiers you've left behind and what's happening in that location. But even when I was serving here in Edmonton, I was had some senior leadership positions here in the Army of the West. And when we first sent large numbers of troops into Afghanistan in 2005, 2006, I was in charge of all the soldiers left behind. I had trained those soldiers to go overseas. That had been part of my job. But I remember you would get, phone calls in the middle of the night, because it was 12 hours difference between Afghanistan and Canada, where we were here. And you'd get these phone calls in the middle of the night, and, there's been an injury, there's been a death, there's been some tragic action that's taken place in theater. And so even at those times, it had an impact on my family, as, because I wake up to the phone call in the middle of the night, so does my wife. It would be tough on everybody to live through those circumstances. And if any good came out of all that, though, actually, when I was in Afghanistan, so I was there for about 10 months commanding the mission, what it did is cause my daughter to learn to read the papers and pay attention to the news. She was all worried. She was all worried about what was happening. But it was funny. My wife said, every day she would flip through the news, go online, see what was happening.
Oh my goodness. I can't even imagine what she.
Yeah.
I can understand maybe the reaction she probably gives towards you now. That makes more sense towards you.
Yeah. So
On that topic of Afghanistan, as I understand, you were Brigadier General in Afghanistan from about November 2006 to August 2007.
Right.
So 2 months before you take on that role, the Canadian military in, I think, Kandahar launches Operation Medusa, which at the time was Canada's largest combat mission in something like over 50 years, involved over 1,000 members of the Canadian Armed Forces. And I think ultimately, so Medusa pushes some members of the Taliban out of a desired district. And then 2 months later, you come along. And then shortly thereafter, so December 2006, Operation Falcon Summit is launched. And so Medusa versus Falcon Summit, from what I could read anyways, seem to be two fairly different operations. So Medusa seemed a little bit more... it would use heavy firepower a bit more, whereas Falcon Summit used more small infantry units searching villages in cooperation with locals and tribal elders. And so the question is, as a leader, you come into this new role for you, but it's a mission that's over 5 years old at this point, and you come in right after Operation Medusa, and then you start commanding troops in an operation like Falcon Summit, which takes a bit of a different approach. Yeah. And I'll admit, I'm a little ignorant to military operations in general. My dad and my uncle were both American, and they both served in Vietnam, but I don't have much exposure to it outside of that. But I would imagine, so strictly from a leadership perspective, that there's a lot going on there and a lot to consider and a lot of different variables that go beyond the standard leadership role. Are there any major learnings or takeaways or thoughts or advice that you could kind of share based on that experience?
Yeah, I would say maybe I had a bit of an advantage because the troops some of the troops, not all of them, certainly the command element and some of the troops that were involved in Operation Medusa, I'd been responsible for training. And the commander of the time, General Dave Fraser, had actually taken over from me as the commander of 1st Canadian Brigade here in Edmonton. So I knew him. We'd helped. I'd been promoted at that point in time, so I'd helped train his team, which was my old team, to get ready to deploy into theater. So I knew the people. I knew the issues. We followed it fairly regularly back here. In fact, I'll tell this funny story. I think it's funny anyway, is that about a week before Op Medusa kicked off, Dave Fraser was actually back in Edmonton on R&R. We were on a golf course, Northern Bear Golf Course, when he got a phone call from theater saying, yeah, things are going faster than we thought and we need you to come back. So he sort of literally put his golf clubs down, went home, got changed, went to the airport, and flew in a military aircraft back to Afghanistan. But that particular operation was really required because there had been a buildup of insurgents in the Panjwai area, the area that you talked to, and it was really determined that if they were going to protect the city of Kandahar, that they needed to kind of drive that large group of insurgents. They couldn't let them get a foothold in this area. So that was the reason that they had to take such an offensive-minded approach. When I got there and we got into, you called it Falcon Summit, we actually called it Bazooka, which is the Afghan translation of Falcon Summit. Mm-hmm. It very much was more towards the mind of setting the conditions so that the Taliban, the insurgents, couldn't come back into that area, but more importantly was setting the conditions that we could get the local population to go back into that area. So during Medusa, all of the locals went into Kandahar, right? They started living with their relatives, 2 or 3 families to a home. You can only imagine the friction that there would be in that. So part of it was getting folks back from living with their in-laws or their outlaws or whatever you call them, and getting them back to their farms in time to plant crops, right? That was key. That if they were going to be able to, get back into business, plant their crops, whatever it may be, and be able to get them to market and make money, we had to get them back into their villages by a certain time. So it was an interesting dynamic because the troops that were responsible for doing that were the same troops who had just been in this violent conflict with insurgents, right? And so it's one of the things that we had focused the training on for all of our soldiers is the Marines used to call it a 3-block war. You know, in one case, you're within a 3-block radius, you're doing combat operations, you're doing humanitarian operations, or you're just doing security operations. So you've got to have that mental flexibility as a soldier and as a leader to be able to change how you're functioning in a very limited time and space. And so that was a big challenge, right? All of these folks who had been living in very rough and austere conditions, who had lost some friends, some through friendly fire, some through enemy fire, they really were in a difficult place mentally. And so part of the leadership skill at all levels, and the leadership of that particular battle group at the time, were very strong individuals. They were all from the 1st Battalion of the Royal Canadian Regiment, really capable individuals who, even though they had taken some significant losses, they really were able to sort of change their mindset to deliver the right effects on the battlefield, I would say. But it does take the leader at the top to be able to clearly distinguish where they are, what the outcomes are you're trying to achieve, and then to be able to clearly articulate that to soldiers so that they understand what it is and how you expect them to act on the ground. But it's it is challenging because once you're kind of in a free fire zone, you know, there's bullets flying both ways. It is really, really hard to then change your mindset to say, you know, it's talk first, ask questions later, as opposed to, you know, you're under this terrible personal threat of injury or death. So, yeah, the leadership challenges are there, but as I say, the folks who were in providing those leadership in those leadership positions in the battle group were really capable, and I would say for the vast majority of them, all of them rose to the occasion. Yeah.
I mean, I just can't imagine, you know, somebody who has very little exposure to something like that. But so leadership is a pretty common theme throughout your entire career, seems like. Yeah. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you seem like a natural leader. And so I'm wondering, so through your military career, I'm assuming that you had kind of climbed ranks, you know, so from junior officer to senior officer, then up to major general. And you were also deployed in many different scenarios and situations, you know, so like you were in Germany, you were in Bosnia, you were in Kabul, you were in Kandahar, you were in Canada. And I'm wondering if you could shed any light on sort of leadership traits that remain consistent through all those ranks. And I assume as you climb rank, you're also commanding more staff, more troops. And so as that number grows, there's probably some variation there, maybe in leadership styles, or there might not be. And then from situation to situation as well. And, you know, from my understanding, the places like Bosnia and Kabul and Kandahar were probably quite different than your time in Canada. And so with those various scenarios as well, have there been leadership traits that have remained consistent for you across all situations that have seemed to really work well as a leader? Or was there always sort of a need for significant adaptation throughout those roles and deployments?
Kyle, I think it's probably a combination of the two. I would say that leadership, certainly from my perspective, is based in large part on the ability to establish personal relationships, right? And so I've given a leadership presentation, and I showed two distinct pictures, one at the beginning and one at the end. So the one at the beginning is me as a second lieutenant, and it's in front of my tank troop. So I was responsible for 15 soldiers and 4 tanks was my job as a brand new second lieutenant out of training. Fast forward to Afghanistan. While I was responsible for, a few thousand soldiers and, airplanes and all that kind of stuff, the team, I had a team of about 13 people, 15 people who were then responsible to protect me, right? So if you think from second lieutenant, where I'm responsible for, as the youngest guy of the group almost, I'm responsible to take care of these 15 folks and maneuver 4 tanks. Going forward, I've now got this group that is actually responsible to take care of me so that I can exercise those leadership functions, right? So I don't have to worry about where I'm driving to. I don't have to worry about, what I need to go. Someone is thinking of all those things. But through all of that, it's all personal relationships. I like to think that the relationships I had with the 15 soldiers I had as a second lieutenant were no different than those 15 soldiers that were responsible to take care of me, my drivers, the guys who ran the vehicles, the close protection team. They're all people, right? And you treat people the way you would like to be treated. You realize that you're not the smartest person in any situation, and you realize that you can't do everything by yourself, right? You need to leverage the skills and the expertise of those people that you find around you. And I would say that those are the two things that have really, whether I wanted to or not, made me successful. When I went through life, it was never about, I need to do this so I can get promoted. I need to do this job to round out my career. The only time I ever asked for a job was I was going to Bosnia in 2000, I guess it was, and I knew I was going for about a year. And before I left, I said to the senior officer that was in charge of Bosnia, the guy in Ottawa, and I said, when I come back, I want to work for you. And he was a deputy chief of the defense staff, so the number 2 from an operational standpoint. The position doesn't exist anymore, but at that time it did. And I said, I want to come back and I want to do this particular job. It was the director of operations for the Canadian Forces. And he looked at me and he said, his name it was at that time, Lieutenant General Ray Hinault, and he went on to become the chief of the defense staff. He was an Air Force pilot. And he said, Tim, nobody's ever asked for this job before because it's brutal. And I said, no, I know, but at my level, at my rank, that's the job I would like to do when I came back. And I ended up getting it. Now, that just happened to be the job that was the center, the epicenter, center of the eye of the hurricane. When I came back, I started the job, came back from Bosnia in 2001, started the job in July, August of 2001. And of course, 9/11 happened in September. And so there I am, focused on how the Canadian military is going to respond to this threat, both in the United States, which led to our initial deployment in Afghanistan. But, it's one of those things that people who try and plot their way forward and say, I want to do this job, I need to do that job, those are people in my mind who have the potential to be seen as self-serving, right? And I've always found that if you are part of a team, you support those individuals who are on your team, that you try to make sure that they are as well trained and as professionally developed as you possibly can, good things happen, right? Good things happen for the team, good things happen for you. So that's kind of the approach I've always taken is, don't focus on where you may go. Focus on the job you're doing today, and focus on the people you're working with today. And in all likelihood, you'll be successful.
I mean, Tim, I completely agree with that sort of leadership philosophy. But the challenge that I sometimes face, or that I hear from other people is are those leaders who don't value those things, who don't value those personal relationships, who are, you didn't use the word opportunistic, but I'll use that. But I think that's sort of what you're trying to say. And they make it to those high positions, right? And so now you have young leaders looking at these people, and they see the type of leadership approach that you are talking about, and they see the other kind of leadership approach. And it's hard for people to make sense of that, of like, what's the right way of going about things? Like, what do you have to say to those sort of younger leaders who are seeing almost like conflicting styles of leadership? Like, what's the difference? Like, what's sort of is there a long-term payoff with sort of the leadership style that you're talking about versus maybe the one who's more self-serving and has more of a bullying approach or that sort of thing?
So I'll start by saying that part of what made me successful in the military was that the military has a very structured training system, right? And so of all the time, 30 years I spent in the Army, I was away on formal courses for 3 years. French, which clearly didn't take, but essentially they send you back to school. So as a captain, I went and learned how to do operational planning for 6 months, right?
Okay.
As a major, I went basically back to university. There's a college, a Canadian Forces College in Toronto, went with 135, give or take, of my closest friends and some international students, and we learned how to start to function at the national level, right? And a lot of the exercises, you were put in positions which would be well above your pay grade, but you learned how to operate and function with people who you were peers, and you needed to work with them carefully and focus on everyone's success. And then before you become a general officer, they send you back to school for another year to sort of, it's like a postgraduate degree really in strategic studies is the way I would describe it. So that's on the academic side, and then you spend a lot of time in the field training, right? If you're not fighting, you're training, and so you have the opportunity. American officer I served with in Australia used to always use the term "train to fail." When I first heard him say that, I thought, like, what are you talking about? He said, no. He said, Tim, you need to think about it from the standpoint that you need to push yourself in training to the point where you do fail, because then there's some great lessons you can learn from that. If you never fail in training, you really don't know how far you can push yourself. So from that standpoint, the military has always had this tremendous professional development model that has, I think, produced some very capable leaders. But I look at the Alberta Public Service, and it has not had that, right? And so one of the reasons I came back into this current job is I actually believed I would have the opportunity to make a difference, right? So we now have, and they're short courses, but at least they're courses. We now have courses for new managers, the Management Development Program. We've put in place a supervisors program. We've developed and run pilots for foundations for executive directors, and we're restructuring the program for ADMs. And the next one we're going to do is for senior managers, so that, as I describe it, managers, you're kind of leading a small team. Senior managers, you're leading teams of teams. Executive directors and ADMs are really starting to look up and out and do cross ministry, combinations of teams as they go forward. So we're putting in place some of those constructs to actually give people the tools they need to be successful in their roles. The thing that the positive thing I take out of your description, your question though, Rupesh, is that there are now young people, young leaders in our organization who recognize bad leadership.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
All the time.
All the time. Yeah. And so my message to them is, don't get discouraged, right? Do not get discouraged. you know what the right things are, and we're, through our professional development now in the APS, is that we're trying to ensure that people have those skill sets and have the understanding to be successful leaders. Do we have bad leaders in the APS? Without question, right? Absolutely we do. But we've got some great leaders as well. And I think that's where we need to focus on. And I remember an old sergeant saying to me during training once, no one is completely useless, right? They can always be used as a bad example, right? And and so I don't think it was taught to me, but it could have been. But I think it's one
Was
of
he
those
French?
things. Yeah. He was from Quebec. He was
Oh
from
well.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
so go figure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say that we actually need to focus on the good. There will always be people who are not functioning at the level we would like, and in some ways, it then falls upon the good leaders to sort of protect their people from that bad leadership. Right?
Mm.
It's an added burden, but at the end of the day, it kind of comes with the territory. Uh, but just because there's bad leaders, we shouldn't sink down to that level, right? What we want to do is make sure that we are absolutely have the highest standards for ourselves, model the way. We always talk about that in as our leadership principles. Lead from the heart. I mean, you've heard all
Yeah.
of that
Yeah.
before,
Yeah.
but that's where I think we need to focus on is. There will be bad leaders. I would say there's probably less of them now than there were before, and they're becoming more obvious because as we've kind of restructured the APS and we've reduced a lot of the people in management roles, it's harder to hide, right? And it becomes more obvious that people are not good leaders. And it's not that we need to get rid of them. We need to help them to become better leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think, and I'll test this with you, Tim, whether you feel the same way. But I find that when there are those leaders that that embody the kind of philosophy that you have practiced and preached, I find that you almost get a wider base of followers. And why that can be important is that when you require something of them or there's a task to be done, they're more likely to want to do the task, which has so many more tangible performance benefits than sort of begrudgingly having to do the task because it's a leader who's just, doesn't embody those kind of same principles and has a much more narrower base of followers. Would you kind of maybe agree to that or maybe challenge that a little bit? Or
No, I think I would agree with that. It's I think good leadership attracts people.
yeah.
And while you can't, as you move around, you can't necessarily pick up all the people that work for you and take them with you every time you go. What it does do is it builds a network of supportive individuals and people who are kind of like-minded and are looking for the same standards. So even on the day, yeah, absolutely. If I need something and it's going to be over the weekend, I believe that as long as I explain to people why it's important, why we need to do it on the weekend, what's driving the timelines, that people will willingly deliver. But you're right. If you've beaten them like treated like galley slaves and that kind of stuff, they're not going to want to do that, and they will find reasons not to deliver, or they'll deliver a product that really is not particularly good.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think there is an investment in people that will be returned, multiple times over. Again, if you treat them well and you explain to them what it is you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve. At the same time, there's some long-term benefits to having that approach of treating people correctly as you go up through the system. And I'm limited, right? I came into the public service late. I've only been in it for total of about 11 or 12 years now. But still, there's people in a lot of departments that I feel comfortable to reach out to, right? And because I've worked with them before and I've worked with them in challenging times. Um, and if you don't have that, if you haven't built that network, if you haven't built that reputation as being a good leader, it can be challenging. And the example I would use of that is, I as I say, joined the public service 2008. I was focused in this weird little world of electricity, right? Kyle would understand this. It is a weird. It's a very eclectic little group of people, both in the public service and out in industry. Um, Hard to understand whether it's how electrons flow or
Hmm.
how bills get paid. It's just a weird place. In 2011, I got picked by Brian Manning, who was the chief deputy of the day, to lead the response to the Slave Lake fires. Right.
Mm.
So overnight, I've got 10 ADMs from other departments who are working with me to figure out how government is going to respond to Slave Lake. I didn't know any of them. Right. I did not know one of them. And I thought to myself, this is going to be ugly. Right. And so I had to spend a lot of time at the front end, to build, to gain their trust, to work together to make sure as a team we were going to be able to deliver. I always thought to myself, if I'd been in the public service longer, if I had built a wider network, that would have been a much easier job. And I think that's what you need to focus on as young leaders is how do you build those relationships? How do you build those friendships that will serve you in times of crisis when you go forward, right?
Yeah, no, and that's actually a really, really great example. Thanks for sharing that, because it just exemplifies sort of how you didn't have to use your positional authority, like you were mandated with having to do this task, with leading this task force, but you didn't have to use that because you really worked on the relationships. But I think I think it's great. You're talking about folks staying in the organization and building those relationships, but you also gave a really good example about yourself, Tim, in that you came from the armed forces, was new to the public service essentially, and you were able to sort of use those skills that you had acquired in the armed forces and quickly put them into use, right? To build those relationships. So it's not like it's just because you go to a new organization that you can't, build trust and you can't create those relationships. I think it's just the skill of knowing how to do so is even more vital.
You're right, but there, I will tell you, there's a piece to that transition that I made from military wearing a uniform to Alberta Public Service is that there were people who were very concerned when they found out an army guy was coming to be their ADM, right? And they went, whoa! And what they had read on the internet or what they had followed, heaven only knows, but. There were people who came up to me, months later and said, "Wow, you're not at all what we expected," right? And I think part of being a good leader is understanding kind of your audience, right? Understanding the people you're going to work with, and not to say that I was a Jekyll and Hyde and changed dramatically how I was going to deal with people. I don't think I did that, but I know there are some of my friends who were in the Army would never be able to make the transition to the public service,
Why is
right?
that?
Well, they want to be called sir, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
There was always this hierarchy,
Mm.
and when I joined the public service, and the administrative support says, "Hey Tim, how are things this morning?" It didn't fuss me at all,
Mm.
right? That I had gone from the day before someone was calling me general or sir to someone saying, using, my Christian name. You kind of go, that's life. This is the organization. If you can't take it, you shouldn't be here.
Mm.
But it is one of those things. People have I think some people had this understanding of everybody in the Army is kind of like that Marine drill corps sergeant, right?
Right.
Yelling and screaming at people and demanding
Command
things
and
be
control
done.
style kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that actually was the Army I joined in 1977.
Mm.
it's not the army I left in 2008, right? There was an expectation of all my soldiers that if I'm going to put you in harm's way, they need to know why. They want to know why, and actually they have a right to know why. To be able to explain to them, this is what we're trying to do, this is what we're trying to achieve. We're in Afghanistan not to go out there and like, not to say, Kyle, this is what Vietnam was kind of like, but this isn't about body counts. This is about setting the conditions so that girls can go to school, right? That women can get medical treatment that's at the same level as men. So when you explain people what it is you're trying to achieve, they're much more willing and able willing and able to accept that vision and to be part of how to drive that forward. And the same would apply. I think when I came into the Alberta Public Service, I sat down with my team, and it was a very small team. I went from 12,000 commanding the Army of the West to 32 in the electricity division, right? So it was a small group, but it gave the opportunity to actually sit down and say, this is me. This is Tim Grant. This is how I work. This is my expectations. This is what I want to do. And at the end of the day, I think we and the team as a whole were pretty successful with some of the challenge we faced at the time. So it's rambly answer to that question, but I think at the end of the day, it's all about tweaking. Maybe that's the word I would use. Is everyone has a leadership style, but as you deal with different kinds of people or different sorts of groups, how do you tweak your leadership style so that it really does resonate with the people you're leading at the time?
It comes back to being connected to those people, like you keep saying. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Kyle, sorry, it looked like you want to say something.
No, just it's so Tim Rapesh and I talked about in an earlier episode sort of what the historic traits were for that were associated with people who were masculine and were leaders. So those traits usually were things like they were assertive, they were aggressive, they were stoic, and there was always a bit of an air of machismo or bravura or something there. And then we sort of had a conversation about, well, who were the best leaders in our experience in our lives, and hardly any of them had any of those traits. And so there was this real evolution, I think, of maybe what it used to be or what it used to, what people would try to assume when they were trying to be a good leader versus what it is now. And I think one of the most common themes through good leaders now is what you mentioned about being able to be personable with people and having these relationships that are personal, where you feel like that person is looking out for you, and they in turn and then you in turn look out for them. And I was just reading some stuff on guys like Abraham Lincoln or even Ulysses S. Grant or FDR, and they all had a lot of those traits as well. So I think that conversation around what is a good leader and even masculinity in modern times has really, really shifted, sort of speaking to your point.
Yeah, it's, Rupesh had sort of touched on this before. When he was asking me if I would come on and sort of giving some background on the conversations you were having, but I kind of look at it that, when I was a kid growing up in sort of well into my teens, I would say there was no focus on masculinity. My oldest sister, and I told you how many I've got, broke my nose when I was 12 years old, right? She was upset with something I had done. Go figure. Punched me in the nose, bled like a stuck pig. But, so in my mind, it was, I played hockey and baseball and skied. I was there was a natural athlete in our family, and I'm not that good, but compared to my brothers and sisters, I was fabulous. So there was that. I had sisters who were lifeguards and swam and instructors and all that kind of stuff. But I also there were people in my family who were, the academics, right? And they didn't focus on sports and that kind of stuff. And so kind of growing up, it's just the way people are. Doesn't matter if you're a boy or a girl, doesn't matter if you're into sports or if you're in academics, everyone just kind of goes their own road. I guess when I joined the military, that you're in this, and I should say I went to an all boys high school, which um, there's where I started to see a little bit of the macho side of things. Did you play on the football team? Did you play on the basketball team? And if you weren't one of those groups, then probably you weren't as important as other people. But
Sure.
it's not that it was masculine, but it was, can you take care of yourself,
Mm.
right? It was more along that standpoint. But then joining the army, it's very much of, and I would say I didn't look at it as it's a masculine thing because it's all men. It was, are you fit enough to do your job, right? So on your morning run for physical training, can you lead the group, or are you falling behind? So there was an expectation as a young officer that you would be the leader. You would be able to, maybe not the fastest person run, but you were capable of being in kind of the top tier of whatever organization you were in. Now, when I joined, I will tell you, general officers might have run, and there was probably a few fit ones, but you didn't see that. It was they were off somewhere else, and you didn't expect that. By the time I left the military, there was an expectation that you did exactly what soldiers did from a fitness standpoint, right?
Mm.
So there was, before I could deploy to Afghanistan, I had to do exactly the same battle fitness test that every soldier did. If I couldn't do it, I wasn't going. So I would say, from my standpoint, it wasn't, and maybe I'm the odd one, that I didn't look at it as, is this a masculine organization, but are you capable of meeting the rigors of your job? Now, without question, and you're seeing it in the news in a big way right now. Um, there are people in the military, and there always have
Hmm.
been, who, um, and I wouldn't call them masculine, I would call them misogynist, right? That
Mm.
that women are treated poorly, and clearly there's some are, but I will tell you, I've met some unbelievably strong, smart, tremendous leaders who are women in the military, and I don't see, I just can't rationalize in my own mind that anyone would say masculinity has anything to do with the way you treat women, right? Um, and I think in some ways masculinity has taken on this negative connotation, and probably rightfully so. That I don't want someone to say you're masculine. What I want them to say is, certainly when I was in uniform, are you fit enough to do the job? And I think those two concepts get misconstrued. Right? Can I do more push-ups than a woman? Well, probably not right now, but maybe I could have at the time. Um, but like, who cares, right? Is that a measure of masculinity? I don't think it is. Right.
Well said. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about, and you might roll your eyes at this, so I apologize. I got to ask you about camel spiders, Tim. So I
No.
don't. So I saw a picture. I don't know when it was, probably mid 2000s, maybe, of some American soldiers who were holding their gun out, and there's 3 camel spiders hanging off the barrel of the gun. And the way that the picture's taken, these things look like they're 14 inches long each. And it sort of started this legend, I think, particularly in North America, around these camel spiders. And, they would sneak into troops' sleeping bags at night and bite them, or they would chase troops across the desert. And I sort of looked that up a little bit, and so camel spiders like to be in the shade, and humans cast shadows, and when humans move, their shadows move, and so the spiders would kind of be following their shadows. But still, the image of one of those things chasing you across the desert would be terrifying. I'm wondering if you ever had any interaction with a camel spider, or if you have any stories around that stuff, or thoughts on it in general.
Before you say something, Tim, this was like Kyle's like most pressing question. He's like, I gotta ask Tim about camel spiders.
Well, I'm going to give you a bizarre answer to your very simple question. Is I mean, I've seen camel spiders, and certainly Canadian soldiers in Afghanistan would, whether it was they would keep camel spiders, kind of as pets. Scorpions, I mean, they would find them, they would keep them, feed them, whatever it is. So, but in Afghanistan, camel spiders didn't bother me
Okay.
because I had spent 2 years in Australia.
Mm.
I was on exchange and I was an armor instructor. So I taught young officers how to be tank commanders. And Australia has 9 of the 10 most poisonous insects
Everything is trying to
in the
kill
world.
you.
Yeah, yeah.
It is messy. And so that's where I really was worried about, you get up in the middle of the night because you have to go to the bathroom. And if you didn't roll your sleeping bag back up, is a snake going to go in there or and in their cases, it didn't have to be a big spider to be poisonous. They had funnel web spiders and redback spiders, which are redbacks are kind of in the same category, I think, as black widow spiders. But those are what really scared me. The spiders and the snakes in Australia. So the camelbacks in Afghanistan, yeah, not so much. Yeah. So,
All right. Thanks for entertaining my thought on that.
no,
Appreciate it.
but it's funny. What it did bring back is a memory. Is you go around and you visit the troops in the forward operating bases, and at Christmas of 2006, you go around, and that's one of the occasions where I did happen to see the collection of scorpions that the guys had as pets. But outside one of the tents was a Christmas tree. But the Christmas tree was an 8-foot marijuana plant, right? That was all decorated, and marijuana was a cash crop in Afghanistan, and it was growing everywhere. And these guys had simply chopped one down and put it outside. And anyway, unfortunately, I said, guys, it's got to go. Clearly, it's the leaves kept disappearing. Is it? No, I wouldn't say that, but
It probably did.
I'm
That's
sure
too
that
funny.
would never happen. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Actually, I was just going to ask, like, sort of, what were some fun things that troops would have experienced, in Afghanistan, or even yourself? Like, I'm sure there's got to be things that you guys would have done to take your mind away, or to ensure that you can kind of just get through days, right?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I did, and it was it served multiple purposes for me. I said I had this group of about 15 soldiers who kind of we traveled around together. So we used to celebrate birthdays, right? And so there was an average about one a month, and it didn't matter if it was an officer or a soldier, whoever's birthday it was, or if there were multiple birthdays. We would have someone go to the kitchen and bribe, steal. I don't know what they did, but they would come back with a cake, right? And so we'd sit down after work and have a coffee and birthday cake, and we'd tell stories about what was happening at home, and something just to relieve the stress and pressure of what was going on. So it was it was a great way to find out, sort of take the pulse of what the guys were thinking and what was going on. Of course, they had friends in other units, and they would you'd be able to figure out what was happening. So from my standpoint, it was great. You got to learn more about the soldiers you had. You got to celebrate an occasion, take their mind off of the issues, because my group of soldiers had their own. I would say they had their own challenges to deal with. I spent a lot of time on the road. Traveling from the airfield out to either into Kandahar to do business there with the governor or the police chief or whoever it may be. Going out to visit troops in forward operating bases. But every one of those trips, we were a target, right? And so my soldiers, I would get in the back of a vehicle and I would go to sleep. That was my downtime. Because I'll come back to my day in a second, but they were on high alert. Like, for every time we were outside the wire, they had to be constantly alert. So anything that I could do when they were back inside the wire to make life easier for them, then that's what we would do.
Okay.
But I would get up at about 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:30. some part of my team would either gather with me for a run, or you'd put on all your gear and go for a long march. And your day would start early, and by supper time, people in Ottawa, my boss didn't get up right in Ottawa because of the time change until about supper time. So I was then working from supper till about midnight to deal with all of the stuff back in Ottawa. And so it became one of these very long days. So it was when I got in a vehicle and I could go somewhere and no stress, no pressure, I went to sleep. And people look at me and say, like, what? I said, look, there's nothing I can do, right? I'm in good hands. Mm-hmm. And as a leader, you have to do that sometimes. I trust you guys to do your jobs, right? I trust you. You're going to get us from point A to point B safely. And there's nothing I can do by staying awake and worrying or anything like that. Would just let the chips fall where they may. But it's yeah.
I can't even fall asleep on an airplane. I got nothing to worry about in an airplane, but I can't fall asleep. That's an amazing skill.
Yeah, it's and I can fall asleep anywhere. My wife would say that, but it's yeah.
Has that changed, or are you still?
No, it's no. I can still fall asleep anywhere. Okay. But it actually started as a young officer, right? Because on a tank, where you normally sleep is on above the engine compartment. It's warm, it's particularly in the wintertime, and it's flat, but it's hard steel. Right. But it's better than sleeping on the ground, right? And so you sort of learn just to, sleep when you can and work when you have to. Yeah.
My cousin, he's in the armed forces right now. He's a physio. I mean, he always says that if anything came down in the physios, then Canada's in trouble. But he was saying that, like, in his training, he said that they slept under the bed because they didn't want to. They slept on the floor because they didn't want to mess up their kit in their bed or whatever, because it's just so hard to get it back to where it originally was. So just going back to sort of, you just sleep where you have to sleep. Yeah. I've heard that before. So
yeah. For sure.
Yeah. The other thing that before, I have a couple more questions, and maybe, I don't know, Kyle, if you had anything more you wanted to ask or.
No. I'm just interested to listen in here.
I was just going to ask.
Now that we're done with camel spiders.
Yeah, I'm actually going to leave now that we've talked about camel spiders. I was just putting up with the first 45 minutes to get to that. So I'll see you guys later.
Yeah. When it's remarkable to me that you were saying you would work when sort of your bosses in Ottawa would kind of come online, and it was like sort of late hours. You work in the public service, and you're sort of working, especially at a deputy level, working sort of at the pleasure of a minister or the government. Like, did it ever cross your mind where it's just like, I'm done with this. I need to maybe be in the political side of things? Like, had that never crossed your mind? Because how could you have sustained for all these years just sort of having to be at the, I use this loosely, but sort of at the mercy of somebody else's decision making?
It's a great question, and let me answer it two ways. One is that I learned the hard way that my job as a public servant, whether inside the military or not, is to provide the best advice available to elected officials, right? And provide them with options, fearless advice, loyal execution, as our premier would say. So I didn't always know that, but as I say, I learned it the hard way, and it stuck. But the other piece I would say is that, and I don't say this glibly, my skin is not thick enough to be an elected official, right? If you become an elected official, especially nowadays with social media, your entire life is in the public view. And there are, particularly on Twitter, there are so many things that happen that are just, in my mind, inappropriate, horrible. I mean, pick the words you want to use. But I don't think I could manage as an elected official. That old army thing would come out, and you want to bop somebody in the nose, right? And you go, but you can't do that. That's the wrong approach. So no, I'm very comfortable that I think the best role for me is to be that planner, to be that thinker, to look at what government needs, what elected official needs of any stripe, whether it's in this province, I have served both with a conservative government, a UCP government, an NDP government. And I would say the elected officials are all the same. They're trying to do a great job in difficult circumstances. Mm-hmm. And they follow what they believe is the right thing from their point of view. And I give them huge amounts of credit for the work they put in, the hours that they have to spend doing that, and what they put up with throughout all of that process. And that's just not for me. That takes a very special kind of individual, and I know that it is not in my DNA to be able to do what they do.
I think it shows your humility for you to say that, and just your level of self-awareness to be able to express that, because all your experiences that you've said, you'd think when you say you don't have the thick skin, it's just incredible. I think, I don't know what you're thinking, Kyle, but that's sort of where my head's going for you to be able to express.
So what does that say about my skin? Like, I have paper thin skin. Tim, come on, man. What are you doing here?
Making us all look bad.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate you. I appreciate you kind of going to that. I got a couple of, we got a couple of little, I guess, rapid fire questions, if that's okay. And then, this has been a fantastic conversation. So we did an episode where we kind of said who were the 5 people, dead or alive, that we would want to have a meal with. And so Kyle kind of gave his 5. I gave my 5. Who would those 5 people be for you?
Oh, I would say first and foremost, the person that I would like to the very most who is alive is Tom Brady, the quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, just to be able to chat to him about what it takes to be able to operate to be a leader, and everyone says that he is a fabulous leader both on and off the field. But how he manages that, and to be able to perform at such a high level at an age that's almost unheard of in the NFL. So, in pro sports.
I hate Tom Brady, but I respect the heck out of him. I mean, he's
so
really good, but he's just just like, he won all those Super Bowls, and every single time I was cheering against him. but he's just like, you absolutely can't deny that he's the best of all time. Yeah. And I mean, how could he not be one of the best leaders? Right?
I was going to say, and Kyle, you're talking to a diehard Patriots fan here.
Oh, I'm a Bears fan. So so I don't really have much to talk about now. Well, and actually, your Patriots, Tim, were not very good this year, so there's a little bit of schadenfreude in that, I think.
No, they weren't for sure.
But old T. Brady looked pretty good in Tampa Bay.
I guess the others would be, people that have interested me over the years is Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
Both as a female leader of Great Britain, but also the challenges she faced during her tenure, including the war in the Falkland Islands. Mm-hmm. Another would be Colin Powell, General Colin Powell. First Black man to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and Secretary of State. So, and I follow a lot of his, philosophies on, how to run meetings and, how to be successful and those kinds of things. So he's one that I would love to spend some time with. A couple who are not alive, maybe I would say, is General George Patton. So I talk about him just because as an armor officer, he was sort of the epitome of maneuver warfare, that we would call it, in the Second World War, and how he used his forces. I know there's he wasn't perfect like most of us, but wouldn't mind having a chat with him. And the last one, which may come as a surprise, I would say, would be Mother Teresa. Just how she struggled and what she did kind of in the slums of Calcutta. for her entire life is just, I think it's just something that, you talk about humility and being humble and working to serve others. I mean, that was her in spades.
Absolutely.
So those would be the five. And that's kind of weird to go from Tom Brady to Mother Teresa.
No,
but
I think it's cool. Would you have these people together or one-on-ones?
No, I think one-on-ones, because there'd
Okay.
be, I think it would be such a rich conversation with each one of them that if you had a 2 or 3 hour dinner, I'm not sure you would do service to each of them in turn. So
Plus, like, what are Tom Brady and Mother Teresa going to talk about?
yeah,
Well, I mean, she could have been a big football fan, maybe.
Yeah, she probably would have
Yeah.
been.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
and I think even if you look at General George Patton and General Colin Powell, they come from completely different worlds, right? There was, you think back to the Second World War, and one of my favorite movies is Tuskegee Airmen, right, which is about a black Air Force squadron in the U.S. But the way black soldiers and servicemen were treated in the Second World War, I don't think Patton could relate to the most senior general in the U.S. military being black. Maybe he could, but it would be interesting to see how those would, the juxtaposition of those two individuals. But so.
My last question, Tim, is what is a thing in life that you know for sure? Obviously, there's the circle of life, so that can't be an answer. But just what's another thing that you feel like has sort of remain consistent that you feel is really true for sure?
Well, it's kind of tied to the circle of life. So I'm going to take an easy out here and say your kids will always be your kids, right? And so, my two kids are in their 30s now. As I say, I have a son who's a competitive bartender. I didn't even know that was a job, but
Cool.
but good at it.
We're gonna be watching the Super Bowl at your house next year.
Yeah, that's right.
Your son just slinging drinks to us.
Yeah, exactly. And my daughter running a successful chocolate business, right? But they're still kids. They still want to have a relationship with their parents, which I think is lovely. And so I think that's the truism. I would say it doesn't matter how old you get, how old your kids get, and I'm assuming it would be the same, in your families. But get used to it, guys. You. The days, certainly right now, the days of your kids leaving home, you never see them again when they're 18. I don't think that's going to happen, and they're around for the long term. At least mine are. Yeah.
What's the name of your daughter's chocolate business?
The Violet Chocolate Company.
Okay. I mean, I don't want to brag, Tim, but we have like 9 listeners, so she's probably going to get a bump here.
Yeah. Well, the sad part is if you go there, you will never go back. Right?
I've had her chocolate, Tim. I bought a couple of bars. It's excellent. Like it's really, really good. Yeah.
Oh, nice. I'm gonna check into that.
Good.
Well, Tim, thank you so much. Honestly, it's truly been an honor. I know you and I have talked in the past, but just to have you on our conversation, for you to be able to share a lot of things that you shared with everyone today. Thank you for your service. I think that it's quickly to dismiss that, even though you've been retired for such a long time. But just the fact that you have continued your service in the Alberta Public Service. So thank you for your service, and again, just truly appreciate you as a person and appreciate you joining us today on our show.
Yes, thanks, Tim.
I got to tell you guys, this has been it's been fun. It's been a pleasure, and I'm not sure the last time I've had like an hour and a half go by this fast, but it's good, and I appreciate you thinking that I may have something to contribute, and hopefully the 9 people that listen to your podcast will get something from it as well. So
yeah, all right. Well, thanks so much, Tim.
alrighty, take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.